Okay, so today is, September 29th, 2018. Okay, we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody. Okay, and so now we are continuing with our overview of the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, and we're in the Book of Threes, and we now come to Sutta number 35. And so this is called the Hatthaka Sutta, after the name of the protagonist or the person who questions the Buddha. Okay, now the opening is quite interesting, just the opening sentence of the sutta. So it says, on one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Alavi on a heap of leaves spread out on a cow track in a Singsapa grove. Now usually we imagine the Buddha will be staying at a monastery, or at least in a kuti, a hut someplace. But here, apparently, he's living out in the open. And this is the part of India, it's called Alavi. Does anybody know where Alavi is? Do you know where it is? I think it's somewhat to the west, the southwest of the area where the Buddha usually dwelt. No, I don't want to start searching for an internet connection. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that it's to the southwest. So it's a bit remote from the regions where the Buddha would usually stay, like the state of Kosala or the state of Magadha. And so it's, perhaps he hadn't yet established, a regular dwelling place there, and so he had to live outdoors. And so he would make his bed just piling up some leaves. And it's strange that it says that he spreads these leaves out on a cow track. I guess this would be a track where the cattle move back and forth. Okay, now somebody named Hatthaka of Alavi, while taking a walk for exercise, saw the Buddha sitting there. So the Buddha, that night, I guess he would sleep on the bed of leaves, and then during the day, he would use the bed of leaves as his meditation cushion. And so Hatthaka comes to the Buddha, pays homage, and then sits down to one side and asks the Buddha whether he slept well. Now, does anybody know who Hatthaka of Alavi was? Okay, this was when he was an infant. The Buddha had saved his life, according to a traditional story. I don't know whether it's true or not. But when another time, a much earlier time, when the Buddha was dwelling in Alavi, there came a demon named Alavaka, who had caught hold of the king of Alavi and threatened to kill the king. And then the king asked the demon to spare his life. And in order to placate the demon, the king said that every day he would provide a human sort of sacrificial victim for the demon, because the demon would devour human beings. And so first the king would take the prisoners one by one and sacrifice them to the demon Alavaka. Then he would take the old and sick people and sacrifice them to the demon. And then there was as you can imagine, there was a mass migration of people out of the city of Alavi to other parts of the country because they don't want to be chosen as the sacrificial victim. So finally, the king had nobody else to offer, and just the only sort of being left to offer was his own little baby son. Okay, so the Buddha, with his divine eye, had seen what was taking place, and so the Buddha went to the state of Alavi, and he went to the lodging, the dwelling place of the demon Alavaka. And when Alavaka came back to his dwelling and saw the Buddha staying there, he got into a fierce argument with the Buddha. And then the Buddha converted him through a discussion, a conversation, sort of transformed him into a peaceful demon rather than a vicious demon. And their conversation is related in the Alavaka Sutta, which occurs both in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Yaka Sangyutta. So Alavaka was a yaksha, or yaka in Pali. So it's in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Alavaka Sangyutta, and it also occurs in the Tiki-nipāta. I think it's towards the end of the first chapter in the Tiki-nipāta. So, and then it's the commentary to that sutta that relates the background story. So the Buddha engaged in a conversation, and at first a kind of a battle of wits with the demon Alavaka. And then when he had broken down the demon Alavaka's pride, then they had a kind of conversation on the Dhamma. And Alavaka asked the Buddha several questions, a number of questions. Some are simple, some are quite profound. The Buddha answered them, and then Alavaka declared his allegiance to the Buddha. And this conversation took place on the very night before the day that the king of Alavaka was to offer his little baby son to the Buddha, to the demon, as the meal for the demon. And that little baby son was named Hattaka, or he came to be named Hattaka. So it's said that the king's men brought the little boy to the cave where the demon Alavaka was dwelling, and then frightfully they offered the little boy up to the demon Alavaka, who was waiting outside. But then the demon took the little boy in his hands, gave it to the Buddha, or gave him to the Buddha. The Buddha recited a blessing over the little boy, then gave him back to Alavaka, and then Alavaka sort of peacefully put the little boy down on the ground and sent him back to his father. And so because that little boy had been passed from hand to hand, from the hands of the king's servants to the hands of the demon Alavaka, then from Alavaka's hands to the hands of the Buddha, back to the hands of Alavaka. So he came to be called Hattaka, which the Pali word for hand is Hatta. And so Hattaka is the one who is passed from hand to hand. Okay, so now Hatthaka of Alavi comes to the Buddha and asks him whether he has slept well. And then the Buddha says, yes, I slept well. I am one of those who sleep well in the world. And there's a little sort of wordplay here involving the Pali word that's translated as to sleep. The Pali word is sati. I think it's sati. Yeah, well, this is the aorist form, asaita, and then it uses here the plural, sainti. So there's one meaning, sort of the usual commonplace meaning of sati is to lie down in the sense of going to sleep, and then by extension, meaning to sleep. But it also has another sort of implication of living. I guess when you sleep or when you lie down, it's a way of dwelling, and so it comes by extension to mean living. Okay, so the Buddha, when he replies, he's replying with that double sense in mind. On the one hand, he says, I slept well. I am one of those in the world who sleep well. But sort of the implication is that I live well, and I'm one who lives well. Okay, but Hatthaka takes that quite literally, and so he says that apparently this was the cold season in India. So it's not quite as cold as it is in the United States and North America, but he says that now the winter nights are cold. It is the 8-day interval. So this is, in Pali, it's called the Himapatana Samaya. So Samaya is the time, or more broadly a season. Patana is falling down, and Hima is snow. So you know the Himalayan mountains, the Himalayas. Alaya is a storage place, accumulation place, and Hima is snow. So the Himalayas are so called because that is the place where snow accumulates. Okay, so this is the time, even in India, when it gets cold enough, occasionally there'll be a snowfall. So he says the winter nights are cold. It's this 8-day period. It comes a time, probably late January, early February, the coldest time of the year in northern India. And so this is said to be the time when the snow falls. Okay, the ground is trampled by the hooves of the cattle. It's rough. And then the spread of leaves is thin. And you're just wearing your monastic robes, and there's a cold wind blowing. So how can you say, I slept well? Okay, then the rest of the sutta, well, it's interesting for the spotlight that it shows on lifestyles in ancient India. Okay, so the Buddha is going to question Hattika in order to drive home his point. So he gives the example of a wealthy householder who lives in a house with a peaked roof. It's a kind of mansion, plastered inside and out, and so on. He has a couch spread with rugs, blankets and covers, an excellent covering of antelope hide, with a canopy above and rud bolsters at both ends. You see, even at this time, in ancient times in India, there was still, even though there was a lot of poverty, but there were some people who lived in extreme luxury. Okay, he has an oil lamp burning while he's sleeping, and he has 4 wives who serve him in extremely agreeable ways. Okay, so then the Buddha says, what do you think, would he sleep well or not? And then Hattika says, of course he would sleep well. But then the Buddha questions him whether there might not arise in that young man bodily and mental fevers born of lust, born of hatred, born of delusion, that would torment him so that he would sleep badly, not well. Okay, so of course Hattika replies in each case, yes. Okay, so then the Buddha drives home the point, sort of the message of the sutta, that there might arise in that young man who is sleeping under such luxurious conditions, with 4 wives probably fanning him as he goes to sleep. So there would still arise bodily and mental fevers, torments born of greed, hatred and delusion, so that he would sleep badly. But the Tathagata, the Buddha, has abandoned greed or lust, hatred and delusion, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, and so on, so it no more is subject to future arising. Therefore, he says, I have slept well. And then he concludes with some beautiful verses. He says, he always sleeps well, the Brahman who has attained Nibbana. So the Buddha's using the word Brahman, you could see, not in the sense of somebody from the priestly caste, but he's sort of reconceptualizing the idea of what is a real Brahman. So the real Brahman for the Buddha is the one who has attained Nibbana, who has become cool through the eradication of the fevers of lust, hate, and delusion. Siti Bhutto, yeah. Sitala is cold in Pali, so Siti Bhutto, and who is Nirupadi, without the acquisitions. The acquisitions are the possessions of greed, hatred, and delusion. And then having cut off all attachments, having removed anguish in the heart, the peaceful one sleeps well. Upasanto sukhang seti, santing papoya chetaso. Very beautiful in Pali. So upasanto is the peaceful one, the calm one. Then sukhang is well or happily. Seti, he sleeps. And papoya is, this would be the absolutive or gerund, having attained. Santing is shanti, peace, chetaso, of the mind, but yeah, having attained peace of mind. Okay, so the message of the sutta is fairly simple, but it's laid out in this interesting dramatic exchange. Any questions on this? Okay, let's go to the next sutta, which again has a very dramatic scenario. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to speak about the three divine messages. And we come across this expression, divine messages, in the traditional sort of commentarial and legendary story about the Buddha's life. When you know the story of the Buddha's life, that he had, as a prince or a young man, he had no knowledge at all about old age, sickness, and death. He thought people live forever, always young, always healthy, until out of curiosity, one day, he wanted to see the realm outside the palace. You know, like in 29 years, he had never saw his father growing old. He never had a cold or sore throat in his life, and never saw people within the palace getting sick. Apparently his grandparents must have still been alive. His large extended family, his grand-aunts, grand-uncles must have still been alive. So that's the traditional story that that monks today still tell to people in the villages who gobble it up and take it quite literally. But in the traditional story, the old man, when the prince goes out on his trip outside the palace, he sees the old man and he asks the charioteer, "What is that?" And the charioteer has to explain, "That's an old man." "What's an old man?" And the charioteer has to explain that people grow old, you know. And then he asks, do I grow old too? And the charioteer says, yes, everybody grows old. And the same with the sick man. What is that? That's a sick man. Does everybody fall sick? Yes, everybody falls sick. And finally, passing the funeral procession, what is that? That's a dead man. What's a dead man? Never heard of a dead man before. Well, at some point, the charioteer says, life comes to an end, the life force is exhausted, and then we die. Do I die too? Everybody has to die. Shocking. So that's the traditional story. Has anybody who never heard that story before? Oh wait, did you hear that story before? Venables, have you told that story before? Have you told it? And the people who are listening, are they surprised by the story? Or do they take it quite literally? They believe it. So traditional Buddhists think that Prince Siddhartha had no idea up to that point, no idea of old age, sickness, and death. So this is the first time he's learning about them from the chariot driver. Okay, so in the traditional story, old age, sickness, and death are therefore called divine messengers. And now I think here in this sutta we find the basis for that story. Okay, so the sutta begins with the statement that there are these three divine messengers. So what are the three? Okay, so here somebody engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. Maybe he gets away with it during life. Everybody thinks he's a respectable member of society, of his community. But he doesn't get away with it forever, because with the breakup of the body after death, it says he's reborn in the plane of misery in a bad destination in the lower world, in hell. And there the wardens of hell grab him by both arms, sort of pull him, and they present him to King Yama. Okay, now King Yama is said to be the legendary god of death and the judge of one's future destiny. Now this to me is a little bit puzzling, this part of the story, because the way I understood King Yama's role, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but in the traditional picture, when somebody dies, then before they arrive at any destiny, then they come into a kind of courtyard or a court in the presence of King Yama. And then King Yama, I think, holds up a mirror that's supposed to reflect the past deeds of that person. And then King Yama looks in the mirror to see the past deeds of that person, and then on the basis of what he sees in the mirror, then King Yama determines where that person goes. So if the person has done a lot of misconduct by body, speech, and mind, at that point King Yama will say, down to hell with you. If the person has done a moderate amount of bad deeds, then King Yama might say, to the realm of the pretas, for you, the realm of the afflicted spirits. If the person has just behaved in a bestial way during their human life, King Yama will say, go to the animal realm. And if the person has done good deeds, then King Yama will say, go back to the human realm, or even go to the celestial realms. But here it said that the person is already reborn in hell, and then he's brought to King Yama for an explanation why he's been reborn there. Okay, so now the wardens of hell are going to give some explanation what kind of deeds this person has performed. And King Yama, you could see from this sutta, is functioning not as the judge who determines what destination one goes to in the afterlife, but King Yama is the one who determines what kind of punishment you will receive in hell. Okay, so the wardens say that this person did not behave properly towards his mother and father. So you could see what's being done in the form of this legend is presenting at least some of the principles of good conduct that's expected of a follower of the Buddha Dharma, or follower, you could say, of any religion. So he did not behave properly towards his mother and father. He did not behave properly towards ascetics and Brahmins, and he did not honor the elders of the family. It would seem that to go to hell, one would have to do maybe much worse than that. But anyway, I'm just relating the words of the sutta. Okay, and then they say, Your Majesty should inflict the due punishment on him. Okay, but before Yama inflicts the punishment, he has first first he questions him about the first divine messenger and says, didn't you see the first divine messenger that appeared among human beings? So who is that first divine messenger? It's a man or a woman, 80, 90, or 100 years of age, frail, bent over like a roof bracket. I guess that would be like one of these tiles that they use on the top of the roof, bent like this, crooked, wobbling as they go along, leaning on a stick. Oh, ailing, youth gone, with broken teeth, gray hair, or bald, with wrinkled skin and blotched limbs. So that is the first divine messenger that one should take account of. And then King Yama says, didn't it occur to you, I too am subject to old age, and so on. Let me do good by body, speech, and mind. Okay, and then the man says that I didn't do this, I was heedless. Okay, then King Yama says that bad karma of yours was not done by your mother or father, not by your brother or sisters, by anyone else, but you are the one who did that bad karma, and you yourself will have to experience its result. Okay, then the same question goes on about the second divine messenger. What is that? It's a man or a woman sick, afflicted, gravely ill, lying in his or her own urine and feces, having to be lifted up by some and put down by others. And then he questions him, the man, about the third divine messenger. So what is the third divine messenger? Didn't you see among humans a man or a woman 1, 2, or 3 days dead, the corpse bloated, livid, and festering? Does this resonate with anybody or ring any bell, this description? 1, 2, or 3 days dead, the corpse bloated, livid, and festering. Yes? Exactly. Like, it's exactly the same words that he used. So you could see, probably because the way the texts were transmitted through oral recitation, when they want to describe somebody they want to describe a corpse, they will use a common set of terms to describe the corpse. So whether it's in the Satipatthana Sutta, where they have the charnel ground contemplations, or in this passage describing the dead person. Except that in the Satipatthana Sutta, where you have the charnel ground contemplations, each one, these terms are broken up, and so each term represents a different stage in the decomposition of the corpse. Whereas here, all of these terms are just joined together as a general description of the corpse. Okay, so the man confesses, yes, I saw the corpse before, but it never occurred to me that I too am subject to death, not exempt from death. And these phrases, I too am subject to death, not exempt from death. I too am subject to old age, not exempt from old age. I too am subject to illness, not exempt from illness. Does this resonate with anybody? Has anybody seen this before? If you've read the whole Anguttara Nikaya, you might have come across it. You don't have it in the Girimananda Sutta.
Daily reflections.
Right, yeah. There's a sutta that comes in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fives. Let's see if we could find it quickly. So everybody has been negligent, heedless. Yeah, this is Book of Fives, Sutta number 57, very important sutta. So it says that there are these 5 themes or 5 ideas that should often be reflected upon by a woman or a man, whether a householder or one gone forth, whether a monastic. So what are the 5? I am subject to old age, not exempt from old age. I am subject to illness, not exempt from illness. I am subject to death, not exempt from death. And the other 2, I must be parted and separated from everyone and everything that's dear and agreeable to myself. And the 5th, I am the owner of my karma, the heir of my karma, and I will be the heir of whatever karma I do, good or bad. So those are 5 themes that should be reflected upon frequently, the Buddha says, abhinhang pachaveki tabbang. And not only by monastics, but by anyone, man or woman, householder or monastic. And so the same words here, so this is the way of sort of reinforcing that same message. Okay, so then Yama winds up the message, winds up this passage, and then he says, you are the one who did that bad deed, and you yourself will have to experience its results. Okay, so then when King Yama finishes questioning the person, then he falls silent. And then the wardens of hell, of hell grab hold of that person and then inflict terrible, terrible sufferings upon him. We don't have to go into the details. This is interesting, though, the very last part of the sutta. Okay, so after witnessing, it's interesting the way the sutta uses this kind of almost like mythological framework in order to convey, we call spiritual messages, moral messages. Okay, so it says, once in the past, King Yama thought, those who do in the world who do evil deeds are punished with such tortures, then he formulates or gives rise to the wish, oh, that I might be reborn as a human being, that a fully enlightened Buddha might arise in the world, and that I might attend upon or serve that Blessed One, that the Blessed One might teach me the Dhamma, and that I might come to understand the Dhamma. And then the Buddha says that I'm not repeating something that I heard from somebody else, but I'm speaking about a matter that I've actually known, seen, and understood myself. What should we make of the sutta? Do we take it literally? How do you teach it to the traditional Buddhists? What do you think? Do we really come after death in front of some kind of supernatural being who's going to lecture us about old age, sickness, and death? What do you think? Do we have that extra microphone? Venerable Buddhapala, what do you think?
After the advancements of science, scientific people have developed logical mind.
People have a what mind?
Develop logical mind, logical.
Logical?
Yeah. I mean, because of advancements of science,
Yeah.
So even in traditional Buddhists, now they are educated.
Yeah.
So many of them do ask, is it true? Or they have sort of differentiating between methodological belief and the actual.
Yeah.
And many other who are non-Buddhist, they also put a lot of questions like this.
Yeah.
So nowadays we try to focus more on mindfulness and the power of now and daily life and health, happiness and all these things. And we say that, let you focus on present life.
Yeah.
If in case there is all this thing, these dramas, so it's fine, you will be, you have two advantage. First, you enjoy this life, you have peaceful life.
Yeah.
In case there is all these things, so you will be free from them as well. So we believe in that way. We don't emphasize that there is somebody there.
How about at Blue Cliff Monastery?
Right like that.
They don't speak about the destiny after death?
No.
Wow.
They speak about the present moment
Wow.
and mindfulness now.
Wow.
And if you want to see where you're going, look at yourself now.
Wow. Just that whole last... How about Bhavana Society? Give him the microphone. I'm sure that Bhante Gunaratna, coming from a traditional Sri Lankan background, would
No,
say,
not at all. He never really spoke too much about heavenly realms or hell realms. He just said, practice your mindfulness. He would emphasize more the ethical and spiritual
somebody says,
development.
why should I be ethical?
Hmm.
I could enjoy myself in this life and get away with it. Yeah. Just have to be clever enough.
It's true. But I think he would point out, like Venerable Buddhapala said, that, people use these tools to show you never know, who knows, kind of thing, and it's best to develop more wholesome ethical behavior than risk it, because it's in those times you had to stir the people and guide them.
And nowadays you don't have to stir up people.
No, you still have to stir up
People are
people.
so virtuous now compared to the past that we don't have to stir them up.
But I think that's something that's very important to show that there is real life consequences for our actions, and teaching of karma, that it's not something that's superstitious or mystical, but it has real world implications. Our behaviors actually still have real world applications of how we react in the present world.
So this is superstitious and mystical.
No, not for the people of ancient India. That was a real fear, that there was monsters in caves and worlds where people get dragged and thrown into fiery pits.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure it's quite different in present-day Chinese Buddhism. Do they speak about, who is familiar with? Anybody familiar with the traditional Chinese style of?
I think Chinese Buddhism is more devotionally oriented. So I believe this aspect is still emphasized. Only people maybe with nowadays more scientific mind, oriented mind, they would take this as allegorically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are still so many ceremonies performed in the Chinese tradition, and this aspect, I think it's still preached that way.
And Korean Buddhism, how is?
Wow. Well, I come originally from the Catholic tradition, so all this talk of hell and the King Yama and all of that and going to hell, it's very interesting to see this, because I think most people see Buddhism as a peaceful, not having these hell realms and things like this. So it's very interesting. In Korean Buddhism, there's an emphasis on the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is filled with different protector gods and deities and things like this. So I can see how that works. And it's very interesting how the Buddha or the writer of this particular sutra uses the full range of human experience and emotion to get across this notion of what essentially is reflection on heedlessness.
Actually, that's actually a good point.
Hi, good morning. I have a question that came up for me. That King Yama seems like regretful at the end when he says, speaks about how he wants to attain a human state.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's a backstory to that, if there's any more, like the story of King Yama and how he got to that place, and just.
There might be, but I don't remember. Though what's interesting, usually we sort of give a rationalistic explanation of King Yama, that he's not a real being, but he's just one's own deeds sort of reflecting back on, it's just a symbol for the way that one's own deeds reflect back on oneself. But in this sutta, it's shown that King Yama gives rise to this wish, probably as a result of his past karma. Maybe it's a very mixed karma. Because of good karma, he gets to be in the position of a king, and he does not undergo the suffering of hell himself. But maybe because of bad karma, it becomes his task to condemn the beings who appear before him to different types of punishment in hell. And so because he has that mixed experience of, on the one hand, certain privileges and power as the king, but also certain constraints because of his obligations as the king of the hell realm. So this incites him to this wish and aspiration to get free from this whole misery of, this misery of these ambivalent positions.
What kind of beings were like King Yama and the Wardens of Hell? Were they like yakas or anything?
In terms of the different realms?
Yeah.
I don't know. He's not, in fact, it's said that leaving aside King Yama, the beings who are called the Wardens of Hell, if I remember the commentary, it says that they're not actually sentient beings, but they're some kind of manifestations of the karma of the beings who have been reborn in hell.
So basically you're dragging yourself into
Well, maybe that would be a somewhat modernistic way of expressing it.
And was there a position like this up in the heavenly realms? Like a ruler over,
There's one common front of a...
like Saka or something like that?
I don't recall any sutta which assigns to Saka the role of assigning beings to different positions within the heavenly realms. It's just that one is reborn in heaven. But here I think to dramatize and maybe to instill some sense of agitation in the people who are listening to the sutta, it's dramatized in the form of King Yama passing the judgment. Anybody else have some idea about Stephen?
I have to say, as a person who is, I guess, supposedly part of the modern world, this sutta is actually very, in a way, troubling, because if we're told, sort of, oh, don't worry about this, don't pay much attention to this stuff in the suttas, which is not, I mean, this is not a one and only instance of reference to these unfortunate realms, right? This seems to be a part of the whole structure of the Pali canon, that there are these lower realms and there are those upper realms, and we're somewhere in between. And so if we're told sort of don't worry about it, or it's allegorical, or just be here now, it seems like we're sort of starting to enter into this whole aspect of cherry picking what we want to think. You know, oh, you don't have to think about that, but think about this. And so then it seems like the so-called modern rational mind starts thinking, well, does that mean I don't have to think about higher realms? Or do I have to not really think about nibbana as a real thing either? Do I just worry about my, just don't worry, be mindful, don't worry, be happy kind of mentality? What does that even mean? How am I really approaching these suttas? I don't have any answer to that, but it seems troubling.
What do you think is troubling?
That I'm entering into sort of a cherry-picking, selective aspect.
What's troubling is the cherry-picking.
Yes.
Not the fact that other realms of existence are recognized as the destinations corresponding to types of karma.
No, I mean, what's troubling to me is that if I'm investigating these suttas very seriously, if I'm devoting a large portion of my life to their study and practice, then to sort of disregard aspects of them that I find unpleasant seems troubling.
Yeah, that is what's troubling,
Can I say something? I don't think, like, if we put this into modern terms or different way of teaching, if we're speaking about living a wholesome life, not being heedless, takes a lot of mindfulness to live your life like that. It doesn't, we're not saying there's not consequences. And you can create a living hell for yourself right here by the type of life you're living.
Yeah.
In my perception, this is not disregarded. This may be spoken in an extreme way. The same in Catholicism,
Yeah.
which I was raised in. You hear about hell and the fires and
Yeah.
so on, but it puts you on a path to live a good and holy and wholesome life.
Yeah.
I don't think it's disregarding it in this case,
Yeah.
in my perception and my understanding.
Yeah.
Like, you have consequences right away when you're on a wrong path, on a wrong track.
Except I wouldn't say that the unpleasant consequences come right away.
I think they can.
They can, but not necessarily. I think you could take these multimillionaires and billionaires who are creating lots of harm and misery for people, and they are flying around and staying in, maybe they have 5 homes, and many servants, going to the best restaurants. And at least at one level, you could say they're really enjoying this life. Maybe you could say, okay, if you look deeply enough, just like the sutta on, did you sleep well? Okay, so as long as they have greed, hatred, delusion, from time to time they're going to have torments that wake them up in the middle of the night and disturb their sleep. But that remains pretty much buried beneath the surface most of the time. And they go around enjoying their lives. You could even have these big leaders of these criminal syndicates who are living extremely comfortable, luxurious lives.
The only exception I would say with the criminals is they're always living in fear. Of being hit. Some of the really big.
yeah,
I would say maybe that, but I generally agree with you.
Yeah, that would be true about the criminals.
Yeah. I
too,
mean, there's that little edge there.
Yeah.
They always have to have dogs and chains and fences and things. But even, the Catholic Church has much less emphasis now on hell and this is, I think it was John Paul, the Pope, who had basically just said, hell isn't a place, it's a state of mind sort of thing. So, and there have even if you go back in quite early Catholicism, I want to say Aquinas, but don't quote me. But I think it was Aquinas
I'm not an expert on Thomas.
No, but and I'm really paraphrasing. I read this maybe 30 years ago. But Aquinas had basically said, look, for people to take this stuff literally, that's for simple, stupid people, which was most of the people, back then, and little children. But someone with learning and discernment, reads the scriptures, at a much deeper level. So even back in the medieval period, even in Christianity. And I was going to say to, if you want hellfire and brimstone, Ajahn Jeff still preaches that. Go to Ajahn Thanissaro, who's a very interesting speaker. He definitely will talk all about the different realms. So it's still done.
Okay, Buddhapala, Venerable Buddhapala.
With this sutta, Bhante,
Yeah.
Regarding all this super thing, we have to, I think, also look from the historical point of view. Because if we see the words like Brahmana, Karma, Buddha has adopted and given his own meaning.
Yeah.
So to some of the mythological stories which were coming down in India, Bhante, I think either Buddha might have adopted that to give, as you said, to drive home a message. Or maybe later point, the sutta might have been composed by some of the monks. So this we have to keep in mind. I mean, we have to look from historical as well.
That's a bit of a slippery slope. I mean, I agree. I think probably a fair amount of the material in the Sutta Pitaka was actually composed at a somewhat later time. But once you get into this take this approach that those parts of the suttas that don't sort of agree with our modern way of understanding, those must have been composed by the monks. Then you have like some people who say, of course the Buddha didn't teach rebirth. That was all put in by later generation of monks. Okay, so let's...
Andy,
Yeah.
there is, we are overconfident of our, what you call modern.
Yeah.
That
yeah.
whatever we mention modern actually is up to Newtonian. Is this actually, if we use a quantum physics approach, it survives science.
It survives science?
Yes, science, with the concept of parallel universe, hell exists, it's a physical exists.
Yeah, yeah.
Heaven exists,
Yeah,
it's a physical exists.
yeah.
Who knows? Maybe 500 years
Yeah.
from now, scientists find a particle called karmaton.
Karmaton.
Yes,
Karmaton.
I'm making this up. So we are overconfident with our modern science, and our modern science is not modern enough. We are still apply a Newtonian concept.
Yeah. Okay, I think I want to wrap this up. My opinion. I accept the reality of other realms of existence corresponding to the descriptions of heavens and hells. And of course I would accept that it's karma that determines rebirth into these other realms of existence. But I would say that the particular dramatic, the way this dramatic scene is depicted here, as though one comes and before the judge who questions one and interrogates one and then assigns one to this punishment, that punishment. This is probably mythological or legendary in order to conform to the way of thinking, well, to make it something that's concrete and easily accessible to people. If one speaks in terms of impersonal forces, directing the stream of consciousness to this realm or to that realm, maybe more intellectually sophisticated people from the time could understand. People like especially the monastics who had been trained in the principles of dependent origination, but when preaching to simple people in the villages, you have to make it dramatic, give a dramatic picture. You have to lay out a dramatic picture of the way these processes occur. Otherwise, it becomes completely inaccessible to them. And also, it's just possible as well that within our own minds, when death takes place, that this is the way the mind processes the stored up karmic tendencies in that period when one is sort of undergoing the preparations that will lead to the next birth, that the mind actually brings up one's karmic tendencies in the form of a dramatic confrontation with the divine judge who will question one about one's past deeds and then assign one to a particular realm. Like a lot of people who have had almost everyone who has the near-death experience speaks about finding themselves coming into a tunnel of light, and then there's a being, something like a divine being, who sometimes they will identify with a deceased relative or friend, who guides them through that tunnel of light. And since they don't die, they don't come to the end of the tunnel, but at some point, a voice will tell them, your time has not yet arrived, go back to your body, and then they come back to their body, and they're still alive. So it could be at the end of that tunnel, who is sitting there waiting? Yama. Okay, let us see what we have coming next. You can see that this group of suttas belongs together. We'll have, I think, 3 or 4 suttas that have a common theme. Okay, now this is said on the 8th the 8th of the fortnight. So this is the ancient Indian, well actually it's still used in traditional Buddhist countries. So a fortnight is the period of 2 weeks. So the moon, the month, is a period of 2 fortnights. One fortnight is the fortnight of the waning moon. That's the moon getting darker and darker until at the end we have the dark moon called the new moon. And then the next fortnight is the waxing fortnight, in which the moon is getting brighter and brighter until at the end we have the full moon. Okay, then what lies in between the middle of each fortnight is called the 8th of the fortnight. So that would correspond to what we call the quarter moon. So it's said on the 8th of the fortnight, the ministers and assembly members of the 4 great kings wander over this world. So who are the 4 great kings? Not King Ashoka or not King Pasenadi of Kosala. Yeah, these are heavenly kings. So there are these 4. This is the lowest of the 6 sense-sphere heavenly realms. Each king presides over a different type of divine beings. I don't remember the names and the divine being, but one, you see, the heaven of the 4 great kings is divided into kind of 4 subsidiary realms. So in one realm are the yakshas. These are demonic kind of beings who can sometimes be fierce and destructive, but other times can be benevolent in intent. So they use force and violence, but for good purposes. The end justifying the means. So those are the yakshas, the yakas. Another division within the 4 great kings are the Gandharvas, so Gandhabas. Those are sometimes depicted as celestial musicians, but they're also said to be a kind of deity that dwells in forests, in the fruit trees and flower trees. Of course, Gandhava comes from Gandha is fragrance. Okay, then there's the Nagas, those are the dragon spirits. And then the other division, I think it's called Kumbanda. It's a kind of gnome, G-N-O-M-E. A kind of strange being that inhabits the deep forests. I think they're supposed to be guardians of hidden treasures deep in the forests. Okay, so those are 4 types of beings. So they're not really in a heaven so much separate from the human world, but they're in close interaction with the human world. And there are 4 kings presiding. One presides over each of these realms. And like a human king, they have their ministers, the inner cabinet members, and the assembly members. This would be like the parliament, members of parliament, or members of Congress, if I could say that without a snicker coming up. Okay, so on the 8th of the fortnight, the ministers and assembly members of the 4 great kings wander over the world thinking, okay, we hope there are many people who behave properly towards their mother and father, properly towards ascetics and Brahmins, who honor the elders of the family. Again, the same virtues mentioned in the previous sutta, but then added, who observe the Uposatha. The Uposatha is the special observance on the full moon day and the dark moon day. And then sometimes very pious Buddhist lay people will observe the Uposatha on extra days. the day before and the day after the Uposatha, and do meritorious deeds. Okay, so on the 8th, that's the quarter moon days, on the 14th of the fortnight, this will be on some of the dark moon days. Again, they wander the earth, and then on the 15th, the Uposatha day, this would be all full moon days and most of the dark moon days. Again, they wander over the world, sort of taking account of the human population. Okay, so then if there are few people who fulfill these virtues, then the 4 great kings, apparently the ministers and assembly members, report first to their respective kings, and then the 4 great kings themselves go to the next higher Deva world, to the Tavatimsa Deva world, and then they report this to the Devas of the Tavatimsa world when they are sitting together in their council hall. Their council hall is called Sudhamma, the good Dhamma council hall. And so they say, revered sirs, there are few people who behave properly towards mother and father and do meritorious deeds. And then because of this, the Tavatimsa Devas become unhappy, and then they say, alas, now the celestial company, that is the number of Devas, will decline, and the Asuras, those are the anti-gods, the demonic beings, they will flourish. Okay, but if there are many people who behave properly towards their mother and father and so on, then the council members and assembly members first of the 4 great kings will report this to the 4 great kings themselves, and then the 4 great kings will go to the council of the Tavatimsa Devas and report this to the Tavatimsa Devas, telling them that there are many people who are doing meritorious deeds. And then the Tavatimsa Devas become happy, thinking that now our company, our number will increase, and the number of the Asuras, the demonic beings, will decline. You see, in those days, when you're listening to these sermons, and probably the monks who base their sermons on these suttas will then elaborate with many extensive details. You know, you don't need the internet, you don't need television. It's all just so engaging and gripping. You could probably see, you know, the village people listening to all of these details. The sermon can be going on probably starting like 7 o'clock in the evening and going on till midnight with all of the details and back and forth question and answer from the preacher to the audience. And people will be sitting there with their mouths open. Wow, what happened next? What happened next? Okay, and then Saka. Saka is the ruler of the Devas in the Tavatimsa Deva world. Then he recites this verse. So he says, the person who would be like me, who would come into this realm and would become the ruler of the Devas, should observe the Uposatha complete in the 8 factors on the 14th, 15th, and 8th of the fortnight, and also on other special occasions. So in a way, this is giving the message to the lay people or even to monastics who have lower aspirations, who want to be reborn in the Deva world. So that is the way, the kind of practice that they should undertake. But then the Buddha has the message for the monastics. So he says, this verse was badly recited by Sakka, not well recited. Why so? Because Sakka, the ruler of the Devas, was not devoid of lust, hate, and delusion. But in the case of the monk who is an arahat, who has destroyed all of the defilements and reached the goal, it is fitting for him to say, the person who would be like me should observe the Uposatha complete in the 8 factors. And then for what reason? Because that monk who's the arhat is free of lust, hatred, and delusion. And so, even for even for a simple village person who aspires to become an arhat, maybe not in that life, but at some time in the future, should also follow the same practices to observe the Uposatha complete in the 8 factors. What are the 8 factors, by the way? You've got to know what they are. Anybody? The line says, the person who would be like me should observe the Uposatha complete in the 8 factors. What are the 8 factors of the Uposatha? Yeah, what are they?
Well, there's 5 that we regularly have as lay people.
Exactly the same?
Well, sexual misconduct would be a celibacy.
Yeah.
And then there would be the no eating after noon,
Yeah.
the high bed sleeping,
Yeah.
and the dancing, singing.
And what was that?
The no intoxicants.
Well, that's part of the 5. Yeah, so we have Nachagita Vadita Visukhutasana. So abstaining from Nachagita Vadita Visukhutasana, Mala Gandha Vilepana, Mandana Vibhusana Tana, from singing, dancing, instrumental music, and then from adorning oneself with perfumes, ointments, and other kinds of, and jewelry, other kinds of personal adornment. Okay, any questions on this? I think we'll have to take, okay, any questions on this? Okay, the next sutta we could just dispose of pretty quickly because it's exactly the same as the previous one, except that instead of being free from lust, hatred, and delusion, Sakka is not free from birth, old age, and death, not free from suffering, but the monk who utters that verse is free from birth, old age, and death, from sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. Okay, I think we come to an end here, and then we could come back, let's say 11:30? I'm sorry, 12:30. You come back 12:30 and have a little discussion. And I should mention for those who are living in Connecticut or is that eastern Connecticut? Within the range, because Connecticut is a pretty big state, near Hartford.
Drive from east to west, it's only 2 hours.
Really? Okay, so we have the walk to feed the hungry tomorrow. This will be it's on the BGR website, Buddhist Global Relief website. It's the Laotian Temple near Wellington, Connecticut.
It's by stores,
By
UConn.
by the University of Connecticut.
At stores, so it's in that area.
Okay, so we could end with the 3 half bows to the Buddha. Oh, I'm sorry, we do the sharing the verses for share the merit. Why am I getting out of shape? Okay. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata Deva nagamahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. We share the merits with Yama, make him happy. Was there just